Truth Espresso, episode 322.
He's promising a bloodbath. If he loses, in his word.
Donald Trump has openly vowed, if reelected, he'll be a dictator on day one.
All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach into your arm. You'll be all right. Just inject a little bleach into your arm.
Americans aren't stupid. He was talking about a bloodbath. Sometimes a bloodbath means a bloodbath.
Americans aren't stupid.
Hey there, friends, family, foes, and lurkers alike. Welcome to yet another exciting episode of Truth Espresso. And if you've been following this podcast for a while, and maybe you've listened to the other parts in this series, it seemed like I was finished with this series. But you read the title of this episode right. This is Did Trump Really Say That? Part 6. And I thought I was going to be done with part 4, and then all of a sudden, The Atlantic gave me something that I just had to reply to, and I could have actually done this episode a little earlier, but I wanted to talk about the election in particular, and then the results of the election, responding to it, so those last 2 episodes were about that, but during the final week of the campaign, basically a beginning November surprise, because, you know, Trump's going to be Trump, and he's going to say things that media are going to latch onto and devise whatever context they feel fit to make it the most outlandish thing Trump could ever say until he says the next thing. And so in this part 6 of Did Trump Really Say That?, we're going to look at the Liz Cheney in a firing squad hoax. And we're going to see, what did Trump actually say? Is this actually a hoax? And can we debunk that? And so strap on your seat belts, because here we go. So if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, where Trump allegedly called to put Liz Cheney, his critic that still identifies as a Republican, but headed up the J6 committee back in 2022, Trump allegedly called for Liz Cheney to face a firing squad. And so here is the clip that you might have seen or heard on mainstream media.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
So, that sounds rather nasty. Was Donald Trump calling for his critic Liz Cheney to face a firing squad? And maybe he's just so sore about her involvement in the J6 committee that he's out for revenge, he's out for blood, and maybe that's what he's plotting to do once he ascends back into power. Mwahahaha. So let's see how media coverage has been as they would play that particular jaw-dropping clip from Trump about Liz Cheney. So Trump had made those remarks as he was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and then on November 1st, various mainstream media outlets could not help themselves, and so they had their own commentary, and they would play that clip. And so on MSNBC, Lawrence O'Donnell had this to say.
The kids out there watching their first presidential election should know that no presidential candidate in history has engaged in more personally insulting language and violent rhetoric than Donald Trump. No previous presidential candidate has ever made statements that left people wondering if he really wants to kill with a firing squad his political opponents, including a political opponent in his own party. But that's the way this presidential campaign is coming to an end, with the question of exactly who and how might Donald Trump want to execute if he becomes president? Who does he want to kill if he becomes president?
So Donald Trump wants to kill his political opponents. He wants to kill them with a firing squad. He wants to execute them. So Lawrence, you said that Trump has left people wondering that, but you have left people wondering if you cannot understand words in context. Now let's hear from Casey Hunt on CNN, and she said it this way.
4 days out from Election Day, and former President Donald Trump is escalating his violent rhetoric, suggesting one of his most prominent critics, the former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, should be fired upon. Let's see how she feels when the guns are trained on her face. Let's sit with that for a moment.
Let's see how she feels when the guns are trained on her face, and let's sit that for a moment. Like, let's let that sink in and just stew, let it stir in your mind what those words might mean. Just digest it according to how it's being reported, and especially with the clip that we heard. Trump is escalating his violent rhetoric. And now as I go to some written media, I'll look at an article from Politico. Of course, all of this is on Friday, November 1st, after the Trump-Carlson interview. And so an article for Politico by Andrew Howard entitled, "Suggesting 9-Barrel Shooting at Cheney, Trump Reverts to Violent Rhetoric." And so Mr. Howard says in the article, quote, "During a rally in Glendale, Arizona on Thursday night, Trump referred to Cheney as a radical war hawk before suggesting he hoped to see her staring down multiple gun barrels," unquote. And of course, the only part that the Political writer quoted was the part that would sound the most like calling for a firing squad. So, what was the part of what Trump said that the Politico writer quoted? Well, of course, it's the part that you would expect them to quote. He quotes Trump as saying, "Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay?" Trump said. "And let's see how she feels about it, when the guns are trained on her face," unquote. So yes, that's the most salient, that's the most poignant part of what Trump said. But it's also the part that might make you want to wonder, what question was Trump answering in this interview? What was the entirety of what Trump said? What is the context? What did he mean by that? Was he calling for anything to happen? So, of course, Liz Cheney herself replied on X after she got wind of what Trump said. In the morning of November 1st, of course, I'll provide a link to that and everything else sourced here in the show notes. Liz Cheney wrote on X, quote, "This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. We cannot entrust our country and our freedom to a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man who wants to be a tyrant. Hashtag women will not be silenced. Hashtag vote Kamala," unquote. So yeah, we understand that there's not a whole lot of political love between Donald Trump and Liz Cheney, especially after November 6th, and with Liz Cheney co-chairing the J6 committee. And there are, of course, questions about whether this committee destroyed evidence, whether they had a certain narrative and they didn't want anything challenging that, whether they selectively aired things and hid other evidence. And so that's homework for the listener if you'd like to get into that whole controversy. And then Liz Cheney herself also showed up in person on The View. So I'll play a clip of that. And Sonny Hostin considered this remark from Trump against Liz Cheney the worst remark or threat that Trump has ever dealt toward her. So she mentioned other things that Trump called her, but this was the worst remark, and then she played the clip. So let's hear some of that from Sonny Hostin on The View.
Well, since vice chairing the House Select Committee investigating the attack on the Capitol and your endorsement of the vice president, Trump's attacks against you have been unrelenting. He's called you to be jailed for treason. He's called you a Muslim-hating warmonger. And then by far, in my view, the most serious direct threat against you. We have a clip of it.
So then she played the clip, of course, the part that we don't have to keep repeating just that particular part. So she played the clip, and then here's another part of that. So then she asks Liz Cheney to respond.
What is your reaction to the clip we saw?
Yeah, I mean, look, he's said this nonsense about sort of, war hawk before. But what he did a couple of days ago, he's never done before. Taking the step of saying, 9 rifles shooting her in the face. And he knows what he's doing. Yeah. He knows it's a threat. It's an attempt threat to intimidate. Yeah. Obviously, the intimidation won't work.
And then Liz Cheney, as usual, drives everything back to January 6th. That is the most important day and the most violent day and the worst day in American history in her mind. So, of course, if she has a concept of what that day was like, and if she truly believes it was the way she claims that it is, then it's understandable why she does not like Donald Trump very much. And of course, she thinks Donald Trump deserves to be in jail, like for the rest of his life or that. So of course, understandably, Donald Trump, who doesn't believe that he did anything wrong on January 6th, who tried to call for peacefully and patriotically making your voices heard, and he never called for violence, and he tried to call to make sure that anyone who was there doesn't do violence because that's not what they're like, and he called them to go home and stuff. Donald Trump doesn't believe that he in any way intended for any kind of riot to happen that day. So whatever happened, obviously that day has resulted in intense bad blood between Trump and Cheney here. And it's not as if Trump's bad blood with Cheney started there, but it certainly was enhanced because Trump even campaigned in his 2016 run for president against the Bush-Cheney doctrine, against the Iraq War, and would consider Cheney and Bush and Jeb Bush, who was running for president in that cycle there, like warmongers, and that the Iraq War itself was a mistake. And so the Cheneys have undoubtedly profited off of war, and Trump calls them out on that and disagrees with certain types of foreign entanglements. And so, yeah, there's been years of bad blood between Donald Trump and the Cheney family. Well, Truthspresso friends, wokeness is everywhere. From kindergarten to elementary school to middle school to high school to higher education in most universities. It's all around us where we shop and where we work. It's even crept into many churches. Romans 12:2 says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." So where can we go to get good, wholesome, encouraging, and in-depth materials to study the Bible and teach ourselves and our children how not to fall for the world's traps? Answers in Genesis is a Christian apologetics ministry that equips Christians to know and defend their faith effectively. Answers in Genesis teaches that the gospel of Jesus Christ depends on the firm foundation of the Bible, starting with the very first verse in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis provides the groundwork for understanding the world around us and why we even need salvation. Understanding Genesis leads to understanding Jesus. Answers in Genesis offers something for everyone, from creation evidence to gospel training, from comprehensive curricula to witnessing tools to vacation Bible school, which my church used. From books to videos, Answers in Genesis has what you need and a whole lot more. Oh yeah, and Answers in Genesis even has a creation museum with animatronic exhibits that walks you through the whole Bible. you will know how understanding creation is key to everything else. They even have a life-sized Noah's Ark exhibit called the Ark Encounter. What animals did Noah bring on the Ark? How did he fit them all? Prepare to believe. Prepare to save too by going to truthspresso.com/answers and check out their specials on books, DVDs, merchandise, and more. That's truthspresso.com/answers. So now that we've heard a lot of the backlash over what Trump said and selectively playing the clip of where Trump seemed to give this threat or a desire or calling for a violent end to Liz Cheney's life, let's play a fuller clip to see what Trump said in context.
Is it weird for you to see Liz Cheney, that'd be Dick Cheney's repulsive little daughter, running against you with Kamala Harris?
Well, I think it hurts Kamala a lot, actually. Look, she's a deranged person. She always wanted to go to war with people. I don't want to go to war. She wanted to stay in Syria. I took them out. She wanted to stay in Iraq. I took them out. I mean, if it were up to her, we'd be in 50 different countries. I don't blame him for sticking with his daughter, but his daughter is a very dumb individual, very dumb. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I'd have meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people.
So what's Trump talking about? He's talking about his disagreement with Liz Cheney because Tucker Carlson asked him about Liz Cheney and how she's been campaigning for Kamala Harris against Trump. And he's giving, why does this situation exist? Why does someone from the same party campaign for arguably the most leftist ticket that ever ran for president? Liz Cheney campaigned for Kamala Harris while still claiming to be a Republican, and given Kamala Harris's past statements in her 2020 campaign, Kamala Harris wanted taxpayer-funded gender change surgeries made available for prisoners and illegal immigrants in detention. She wanted to ban fracking. She wanted to get rid of all private health insurance and make it one single-payer, government-sponsored thing. So, in other words, complete socialism there. She supported the defund the police movement with gusto, like everything leftist that you could think of, anything Marxist you could think of, Kamala Harris was fully on board. In fact, I mentioned in a previous episode that Kamala Harris was noted to be even to the left of Bernie Sanders. And yet, Liz Cheney considered supporting that kind of ticket better for America than Trump, because Trump is like Hitler and stuff. But the context here with Trump's words was his disagreement with Liz Cheney about her desire to go to war in different countries. She wanted to stay in Syria, not take troops out. She wanted to stay in Iraq and not take troops out. And according to Trump, if Liz Cheney had her way, we would have troops deployed in some form of combat in 50 different countries. So he said she's a radical war hawk. And then based on that, that's where we have the statement where Trump says, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, and let's see how she feels about it when the guns are trained on her face. Now, some mainstream outlets would include a little bit more context. Some of them would show the part where he says, You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington and in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But Trump also said at the end of it that she always wanted to go to war with people. So what is Trump talking about? He's saying, hey, Liz, you seem to love war. You seem to want the nation and the troops to be involved in war like all over the place, like there's no war that she's ever been against. And that can raise suspicions, especially if you have connections with contractors that make munitions and stuff, and you get to profit more off of other people sacrificing their lives for endless wars. And so it seems to be that when Trump was saying, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, he's painting a scenario. If you like war so much, Liz, would you then be willing to do that type of thing? Would you be willing to be in that kind of situation that you're expecting someone's 18-year-old kid to face? So now let's listen to Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe and how they reported this on the morning after the Tucker Carlson interview. So once again, on November 1st, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski act very shocked and dramatic as they're reporting on this. So at the beginning of the clip that I'm going to play, when they talk about the Drudge Report, they both pull out their phones and they point the screen at you and they glare into the camera blankly as if to say, can you believe that we have to report? Like, this is the kind of news that we have to report? And you're going to hear Mika Brzezinski giving like disappointed sighs, like it's just like her breath is just totally taken away by what they have to report on. She does it repeatedly. So let's listen to part of that and we'll comment through that and we'll make some observations.
And the Drudge Report, Trump calls for Cheney execution. Yeah. And he says that she should have 9 guns trained at her face.
Not exactly what Trump said there, Joe, and definitely not with a proper context. So then, of course, Mika sighs in disgust, and then Joe continues.
Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her. Firing squad, obviously.
Joe, if Trump were talking about a firing squad, why would he suggest giving Liz Cheney a rifle? I mean, I've never heard of a firing squad where you give the one being shot and executed a weapon. Yeah, a firing squad, obviously, huh, Joe? But that wasn't a slip of the tongue because Joe is going to repeat it.
And that's where we end. And, you know, Mika, it's... Well, it's more direct than if she had guns pointed at her. He actually says, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her. 9 barrels shooting at her. This is his final pitch going into the final weekend of one of the most important campaigns, and a campaign that starts with I am your retribution ends with Liz Cheney needs to be in a firing squad with 9 barrels shooting at her.
9 barrels shooting at her face. And on the screen, as he said that, it shows the Drudge Report website with the headline, Trump calls for Cheney's execution, in bold red and underlined. Hey, Joe. Hey, Mika. Maybe the Drudge Report article is misinterpreting what Trump said just a little bit. Maybe this is disinformation, So Joe Scarborough twice claimed that this was a call for a firing squad, but of course he glossed over one thing. If Trump were calling for a firing squad, why would he say to give Liz a rifle? I've never heard of that kind of firing squad. This would be the first time a firing squad ever gave the one being executed a weapon to try to fire back. Joe, can you look at the details? I mean, you yourself quoted the part where he mentioned, let's give her a rifle, standing there. So here's the truth. Trump wasn't calling for anything to happen. Sure, he said, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her. But he was clearly speaking rhetorically. He was painting a scenario. It was more of a dare. It was more of a challenge, like put your money where your mouth is. Trump was saying, if you like war so much, Liz, would you still like it if you were one of the soldiers on the ground in the trenches holding a rifle and having to deal with 9 trained enemies firing at you? In fact, it was an argument to put yourself in someone else's shoes. If Liz was so eager to send other people or their college-aged kids off to war, possibly to die and have their lives shortened without knowing what it's like to settle down and get married and start a family and enjoy any golden years. It's a thought experiment. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, and I think that's what Trump was communicating. And maybe people like Liz Cheney might have second thoughts about endless wars if she didn't have her cushy life in Washington and being able to be on media and write books and be in Congress, and if she had to experience the gory details of war herself. You know, this is the same argument that people have been making since the Vietnam War and its challenge to supporters of the war. It's asking you to think, is this war really necessary? Sometimes involvement in war is, and sometimes it isn't necessary. But Trump's point is that it's easy to be a war hawk when you have a cushy life and you want other people to do the dangerous, dirty work. Would you be so quick to support a quagmire war if you were one of the people in the trenches with a rifle and you had to deal with 9 trained enemies aiming at you? That's the question and accusation that Trump is making. He wasn't calling for anything to happen. He wasn't declaring a goal or anything like that. He was painting a scenario. He was raising a thought challenge. He was raising a philosophical question. He was getting the war hawks to think, would you still have that same position if this were your involvement in the war? Not being someone in government, sitting in a cushy air-conditioned office and possibly even benefiting financially from the contracts, but would you still have that same position? Would you still have that same gusto for the war if the role that you filled were the boots on the ground, getting malaria in the trenches, and listening to bullets whiz by your head, and knowing that at any moment there could be 9 trained enemies with their barrels aimed at you? So did Trump call for Liz Cheney's execution? Did he suggest she should face a firing squad and be the first ever to face a firing squad with a rifle in hand? Most definitely not. So I think we can say, without any hesitation on this one,
hoax busted.
So I hope you enjoyed this part 6 of the series, Did Trump Really Say That? And who knows, we've got 4 years of a Trump presidency. If the Lord tarries on that, if Trump's health and whatnot tarries, if he's not assassinated or whatever, we could have 4 years of Trump in office, and so there could possibly be the likelihood to have yet more episodes in this series in the wings. And so hope you enjoy these hoax-busting episodes, and so stay tuned for the next episode of Truth Espresso, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Truth Espresso. Be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast app. Truth Espresso is a member of the Christian podcast community. Check out other great faith-building shows at ChristianPodcastCommunity.org.